back. You already know what time it is. It's R3's time, where we read. I'm Naila. I'm your CEO and your founder of R3, Realives, Realives, where we promote knowledge of self through education and activism. And what better way to do that than to rewrite and comprehend for your own understanding? So we're going to be jumping right into it. We are reading The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. But go ahead and just click join as I'm asking you to join the live, and you could join here on Instagram. But we are reading Nell Irvin Painter, The History of White People. This book has been a fascinating read, but we are jumping into chapter 4, White Slavery as a Beauty Ideal. So it is joining now. Give me 1 second, everybody. It says you turned on your video. Where are you? And go back to Zoom as well. I see Melody is waiting in the waiting room. I see you waiting. And oh, you're there still. Hold on. Admit all. Okay, and if you press it too on Instagram, you'll be able to see it. But we are reading The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. So sorry for the delay, but we are always on time, R3's time. How's everybody doing? Everybody there? It says you turned on the video, but it's... Who's talking? Okay. I'm new to the Instagram stuff, so it says you turned on...
I'm on both, and I think it's echoing.
Yeah, and I don't see you on Instagram, so it's okay. You can just go back to whichever one you prefer. So, okay, so we'll just jump into it. So we're reading chapter 4, White Slavery as a Beauty Ideal. So in this chapter, it just starts to give us an in-depth description of, in the 18th century, the science of race, because remember, race is a man-made construct. It was developed in Europe, and it just reminds us of the two kinds of slavery. So on the first page, it just goes in there. We'll open up, and I would like to pass it over to our hostess with the mostest before we start. She is live on the scene, so she'll go ahead and tell you a little bit more before I begin. But again, we're R3, we're Eyes, Realives, where we promote knowledge of self through education and activism. To you.
Thank you for having some R3 Realives book clubs. We are reading, The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. And it's just going into the and how it developed over the last 200 years or so, maybe 300 years or so. And it basically developed for a power structure. Previously, throughout the world, it wasn't race that determined who you were. It was basically region, clan, and the area that you lived in. It wasn't a quote-unquote white people that we collectively call that today. It was just different people in different regions based on body types, where they lived, and all that stuff, what kind of food they ate, how they hunted, and vice versa. So at that time, you could have been a black person, or what we call black, or Asian. It's just different than how that developed. But anyway, you can get us at R3 Realize Book Club. Every Tuesdays we're here. We had a little technical difficulty. Sorry about that today, but we are always here. You can find us information. You go to at R3 Realize, and that will take you to Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube channel, and to the website. And all of those forums, you can like, share, follow for free. Doesn't cost you anything. But if you do want, and you're generous, and you want to pay $1 or donate $1, $10, $20, whatever your fancy, you can do that on the website, where we will make good use of those funds. We have scholarships, we have feed, drive-by homeless, unhoused programs where we feed people and give out clothing and all that stuff. So today we're going to be doing an overview, read a few passages from the book, and have a discussion. You can join us in discussion by coming live on Instagram or joining the Zoom if you registered at R3 Realize, and you would have access to the Zoom. You can also send emails and questions to us in the chat on any of those formats, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, or email us, and we will be able to answer those questions and we don't have the answers, then we'll come back next week with the answers, or what we determine the answers were. And that was either by me search or research. And so either way, we will try to get you our answers. It could be an opinion or it could be fact. That's it. Get back to you, kid. We're going to get started so that we can move on. And next week, we'll be coming back with chapter, I think, 5.
All right, perfect. So was everybody able to read chapter 4? It is the white slavery as a beauty ideal. And okay, so we're just going to kind of read some of it. We won't go too much into depth today since I am running a little bit late, but we'll just start on, like I said, the first sentence for chapter 4 kind of just takes us into what this chapter is about. So and this is on page 43. So as the 18th century science of race developed in Europe, influential scholars refer to 2 kinds of slaveries in their anthropological works. Nearly always those associated with brute labor, Africans, and Tartars primarily emerge as ugly, while the luxury slaves, those valued for sex and gendered as female, the Circassians, Georgians, and the Caucasians of the Black Sea region came to figure as the epitomes of human beauty. By the 19th century, odalisques, or white slave women, often appear young, naked, beautiful, and sexually available throughout European and American art. So we'll actually be able to see a few of these images. I always tell people and reference them to these images. One of these images actually became the staple of Americanized beauty here in the United States. So once Americans, or America at the time, the people who settled here, got this picture, that's what became their standard. And we actually still kind of follow that standard now in America. And if you read chapter 4, you'll see that these white women that were described always, they were liked more because they were light-skinned, white-skinned, but had kinky hair, curly kinky hair, and it was referred to like Africans, right? So it was this in-between status that they always had, that they preferred in their ideal of slavery, and the beauty ideal coming into it as well. So if you skip over to page 44, it says in the second paragraph, as usual in Western literature, Benier's 4 races give pride of place to Europe and extend over a vast area, including North Africa and Asia as far as Thailand and Indonesia. For some reason, a part of Muscovy, i.e. the area around Moscow, is excluded. More oddly, American Indians belong to Benier's first mostly European species. So I highlighted that because it's very important that we understand American Indians, Native Americans, indigenous people, different terminology referring to different types of people, just to put it out there. And it goes on to say that in the second species are people in the sub-Saharan Africa, and in the third are the Muscovies, part of the Southeast Asia, China, and the vast lands between China and Russia, including the Tatars, all around the Fertile Crescent and into the Levant, Georgians, Muscovites, Tatars, Uzbeks, and the Turkomans. All belong to the third species. Along in the fourth species are the Lapps. Race theoreticians stumble continually over what to do with the Lapps. And then on page 44, I also highlighted this, so I'll continue reading this paragraph. It says, why such a weird configuration? At least part of Benier's answer seemed to lie in the physical appearance. In the skin color, the third people, the Asians, are truly white, but they have broad shoulders, a flat face, a small squab nose, little pig's eyes, long and deep set, and 3 hairs of a beard. This is his quote from seeing the Asians, and he actually put them in the category as the truly white people. So as you can see, again, this race was constructed, man-made, constructed in order to take over certain territories, in order to have power over another person. But it was all about the purity of race, a purity of whiteness at that time. And for this, Benier's, he put Asians as the truly white people. So I just thought that was interesting to highlight. If we jump over to page 45, it goes on to speak about another quote that they use in comparison for the Black African enslaved people and then the white enslaved people. So on 45, it just says, nothing beyond the commonplace so far, but Benier continues speaking. He says, only for himself, quote, I have never seen anything more beautiful than the naked black slave girls for sale at Mocha in the Indian Ocean off the coast of East Africa. So this is where kind of they're putting into play the the Africans in East Africa and using them in comparison to the white slaves as well. Then I put a star next to, on page 45, third paragraph, John Baptiste Chardin. You should probably know his name, but he's also known as Sir John Chardin, a French Protestant whose family were jewelers in the court of Louis the XIV. He traveled routinely to Persia and India in the 1670s and the 1680s, seeking race baubles for the French royal household. His 2-volume account, and it's in French, so I'll just read you the normal name, which is The Travels of Sir John Chardin in Persia and the East Indies from 1673 to 1677. It describes a trip that deviated from his usual route. Preventing his going via Venice through Constantinople to Asia Minor, local disputes rerouted Chardin north of Constantinople through the wilds, quote unquote, of the Caucasus, today Chechnya and Georgia. In the 17th century, this was an untamed country. According to Chardin, the lands of the people without religion and without police. So I just put that in concepts of what we go through when it comes to race wars or race now and putting people against each other for skin color. These are coming from people who are already classified from their own philosophers, their own historians, their own Protestants, that they were a race of people from the Caucasus Mountain without religion and without police. So on page 45, the characteristics of some of these people, it says at the last sentence, they eat with their hands, they go to the bathroom right next to where they eat, and they continue eating without washing. Chardin is totally disgusted. So Chardin is speaking about these people in a characteristic way to show that their characters are different from the other white people, technically, of the time, right? And so he's making a comparison and differentiating them. I also wanted to put in there that you always hear nowadays how the Moors, right? The Blackamoors, I should say, but the Moors taught the Europeans and the whites how to actually bathe. You always hear people mentioning this, and this is similar to what they're speaking about when people quote that. So on page 46, the first paragraph, it says the habits of the Mingrillians, in parentheses, Caucasian people on the northeast coast of the Black Sea. The Mingrillians, different names, same people, same style, right? It says they are vile. They and their neighbors are huge drunkards, worse than the Germans and all the Northern Europeans when it comes to drink. I think of that, and now in the culture, especially in the United States, but throughout the world, is a culture of abuse when it comes to alcohol a lot of times. And we don't really equate that with culture or characteristics of a group of people. But in this sense, they were dividing each other up off of their characteristics, whether positive, bad, whether their beauty standards, whether they were closely related to somebody who could be enslaved, or whether they had these characteristics they didn't want nothing to do with, right? And we're talking about the Germans, we're talking about the Caesarians, we're talking about the Caucasians, and these are the same groups of people. And then if you go down a little bit further, it describes the women. So on page 46, it's about the third sentence. It says, the women are not much better. They wear too much makeup, and their bodily stench overcomes whatever amorous intention their appearance might have inspired. If you think about that in the cosmetic industry nowadays, it just brought to my mind, like, the cosmetic industry is always having an overabundance of makeup. As you can see, I have makeup on nailtobbeauty.com, but it's an overabundance of makeup to where women a lot of times are just kind of covering up. But I got that picture in my head from that quote right there, that the women of the Mingrillian women were not much better than the men. They wore a lot of makeup and to cover up, I guess, what they were lacking in. And then it goes on to say, these people are complete savages. And this is Chardin talking about them. They used to be Christians, but now they have no religion at all. They live in wooden cabins and go around practically naked. The only people who go there are slave traders. So they come from a history of slave trading each other, and goes on to enslave a whole group of people simply for the color of their skin. That's what I got from that. So I'm just going to go down. Let's skip over to page 47. If you go to page 47, it's going to be that last paragraph. It says, the enduring legend of beautiful white women, white slave women, the Circassians, the Georgians, the Caucasians, dates from Chardin's 17th century. See figure 4.1, the young Georgian girl. And however, a 20th century photo of the Georgians show them as fairly ordinary looking people. So I'm just going to show you guys quickly that little picture. So 4.1 would be the young Georgian girl. So this is what a typical Georgian girl would look like for them. And this was a famous picture by Chardian. Okay. And then if you guys don't have it, it's on page 48. So if you guys turn to page 48, you can see that picture as well. And then the figure 4.2 is the Ostian girl. But these pictures were basically the same group of people, same people, but drawn or taken at a different time. So this is figure 4.2. So this is a typical look. And if you jump over to page 48, it just says to the top of that first page, within 50 years, Chardin's erotic figure had invaded Western art, whose preferred term, adalesque, derives from the Turkish odak, meaning harem room. Georgian, Circassian, and Caucasian were interchangeable names for the figure. So like I said, these all same group of people, but they differentiated themselves based on characteristics on what they felt was positive or negative, whether it was beautiful or not, or whether you're closely related to someone who could be enslaved. And then they divided each other down. So they're all coming from the same group of people, same culture, but they use these different names. So it says each term refers to young white slave women, and each carries with it the aura of physical attractiveness, like I just said, submission, sexual availability, and a word, femininity. She cannot be free, for her captive status and harem location lie at the core of her identity. Similar to how women are seen as objects now, and everything is all sexualized. I always say there's an over-sexualization of women, but black women at that now in 2024. So I got that play from being one of the first people to be enslaved, these white women, due to their femininity or their being able to be physically attractive in order to be purchased. Okay, so then if page 49, it speaks about Kant, and so philosopher Kant. So it says in the last paragraph, this is the third from last sentence, like Kant's treatise, Herder's text, when translated into English, echoes Chardin, but changing Chardin's Persians into Turks, and spelling with a lowercase t. The Turks, originally a hideous race, improved their appearance and rendered themselves more agreeable when handsomer nations became servants to them. And taking note of slavery's alteration of a host society's personal appearances, Chardin mentions a demographic role that upper-class Europeans and Americans seldom recognize at home. On page 50, it goes on to say that by early in the 19th century, these iconic notions of beauty and its whereabouts have moved steadily westward across France and over the English Channel into the British literature. If we jump on down on page 50, last paragraph, I also highlighted also in play were military rivalries that broke out around the Black Sea region, pitting the Russian and the Ottoman empires against each other, first during the Greece's War for Independence in 1820s, and then during the Crimean War in 1850. Similar to like Ukraine and Russia right now, same group of people on the same land fighting each other over one thing, right? And it's just a rivalry between their military. It says both hostilities brought white slavery increased attention in the West. And then especially one word spread, the Turkish slave dealers were flooding the markets with Circassian women slaves before the Russians cut off the supply. I also highlighted on page 50 the last sentence, even Americans followed the Crimean War closely, picking up European culture's enthrallment with the beautiful Circassian slave women. This was only natural given the American slave system, with its fascination for beautiful, light-skinned, female slaves and growing sectional tensions as exemplified in the figure of Eliza and Harriet Beecher Stowe's best-selling Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now pause there. How many people have heard of Uncle Tom's Cabin? Can't hear you. I seen you unmuted. Oh, okay. Yeah. So Uncle Tom's Cabin, it's actually it's a popular. You'll hear people always refer you.
Uncle Harriet Beecher Stowe.
Harriet Beecher Stowe, yes. So it's always seen as negative, right? So Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, that Uncle Tom reference is always seen as negative. And then I will show you a Caesarean girl, but I'll continue to read here really quick. Page 51, it says, the New York impresario P.T. Barnum, never one to ignore a commercial opportunity, took note of this purported glut of white slaves, and in 1864, as the Civil War raged, directed his European agent to find a beautiful Circassian girl or girls to exhibit in Barnum's New York Museum on Broadway as the purest example of the white race. In the American context, a notion of racial purity had clearly gotten mixed up with physical beauty. Barnum cared a lot less about ethnicity than about how the girls looked, advising his agent that they must be pretty and will pass for Circassian slaves. Barnum's Circassian slave girls all had, and this is what I was speaking about on page 51, last paragraph, they all had white skin and very frizzy hair, giving them the appearance of light-skinned Negroes. So I just wanted to show you guys a picture. Turn to page 51, and that picture that you see there is a Circassian woman or slave girl who had very light skin but had kinky hair. So they got the best of both worlds in their eyes. Okay. And that was an illustration from Winslow Homer of the Circassian Girl, 1883 to 1910 on ink paper. I'm sorry, drawn with ink on paper. And then on page 52, if you jump down to the last paragraph, it mentions John Auguste Dominique Ingres of 1780 to 1867. It says, a wildly successful French painter when the French dominated Western fine art, began his career in Italy, a country rife with Eastern influences. His Adolesque epitones of luxe et volupte, lounge languidly amid the splendor of the Turkish harem. They look like the girl next door. This is a highlight I put on page 52. They look like the girl next door, always so white-skinned that they could be taken for French. The result was a sort of soft pornography, a naked young woman, fair game for fine art voyeurs. Witness Grande Adolesque in 1814, an early Ingres work painted in Rome, which established his reputation. So I'm going to cover up the little booty just so we don't get banned. But that would be an image of one of the girls that he was describing. This is the image that actually ended up traveling all the way to America and influencing the standard of beauty here in America. And the terminology they use, the girl next door, you'll hear that a lot too. Basically a girl who's ready, willing, and able to serve the needs. That's what that terminology means. I won't be ever using that again. On page 53, it goes on to say that now and then black characters appear as eunuchs or sister slaves. So at this time, and this day and age, again, like we were still there, but we weren't even considered in the scale of race that it was becoming. We were always just seen as a sister slave, but the more, how should I say it, the more acceptable slave was the white woman that they wanted the most, right? So we were kind of like just left out. We're there. We were being enslaved, but they were going for these white women, light skin with kinky hair that matched and identified with the Negroes because they gave off this sexual femininity. So I think that goes into play too with black women nowadays always being referenced as angry or masculine and this and that because we never fit that standard of white slavery, but also beauty in slavery terms. You know, slavery to have harsh punishments, be very brute was always compared to Negroes, but slavery to have sexual endeavors or to be beautiful and feminine was always referred to as, you know, a white woman's thing. So just that's what I'm getting from it in those chapters, okay? And it also shows some pictures. I'm gonna cover her up, but that is another image, and you can just kind of see the black people in the back. Well, here you won't even be able to see it. Just a bunch of ladies laying around naked, and I don't want to show it too much, okay? And that was John Auguste Dominique Ingres's painting, Oil on Wood, page 53. So another one we'll turn over, page 54. Last paragraph we'll jump down to. So it says, back in France, the Adolesque retained her allure. The popular and prolific painter Jean-Léon Gérôme of 1824 to 1904 occupied the Visual Arts Summit as a teacher at the Académie des Beaux art in Paris and frequent contributor of the Académie's influential annual salon. His slave market, 1867, replaces the usual harem with another characteristic, Orientalist location. So this is a picture of Harems Powers, the Greek slave, and I'll cover up. She is identified as a woman with chains wrapped around her body, but was considered beautiful. I'm just covering up her little nips and crannies there. So she has a chain wrapped around her body, which was still, you're enslaved, you're a slave, but you're beautiful. You have femininity. This is what they were into, okay? On page 55, it goes on to say, on the second paragraph on page 55, that where culture goes, there goes critical theory. And I wanted to highlight that, and that will be the topic of this live, actually. Where culture goes, there goes critical theory, the author Nell Painter says. Thus, in the late 20th century, a new field of cultural studies called Orientalism began to explore Western fascination with exotic East and the feminization of Muslim peoples. Although this new I'm trying to say that weird, Orientalism squared off against the voyeurism and the stereotypes of the 19th century, Western Orientalism, it remained in the thrall of Jerome's overpowering white slave iconography, book jackets on two classics, the field's foundational work, Edward Said's Orientalism, 1978, said it right, and Anne McClintock's Imperial Leather of 1995. Both feature details from paintings by Jerome. Said's jacket does depart from the usual female adolescente to show a naked slave boy. So, can I show one? Okay, I'm going to cover her in the middle on page 55. Those are men looking to see if this woman here that I'm covering up with my middle finger here, if she fits the standard. They basically stripped her naked, looking at her, seeing if she is the ideal beauty standard in order to be sold. And then this one is, I'm going to cover up this area. That is another image there. So what I like about this book is it's very detailed, and Mrs. Nell Irvin Painter actually backs up her research and her data with a lot of paintings and pictures that were actually used as a standard of beauty then. So, I mean, that's what I love about this book, because it gives you, it's not only words, but it's giving you pictures. And remember, we're figurative people. We need to see it with our own real eyes, right? That's why we're R3, real eyes. So on page 56, I read this book a while ago, but I did underline this a few years ago, so I'm going to read it. It says, late 20th century American scholars seem unable to escape Jerome or confront slavery that was not quintessentially black. So again, at this time, slavery was not just black. It was primarily looking for white enslaved women, Circassian women, Georgian women that fit the standard of beauty, because they figured that whiteness and the beauty was better than being brute, being harsh punishments and stuff. That was always considered a black thing. It couldn't be us, right? That's what they were. It's not us. We're on the different end of slavery. So I just thought that was interesting, pointing those two out. And this is the Imperial Leather photo. Is there another neck? It's all these booties. I got to keep covering up. You guys should really get the book so you guys can see it. But this is the Imperialism leather here. And then this one is the Orientalism at the top. I can't show it too much. So, okay. And then lastly, we're on the, So on page 58, let me see where I ended here. So on page 57, I'll just finish reading there. The Circassians' national identity and teach about its past. The website includes photographs of the Circassians, otherwise still hard to find. And she's referring to the organization that set up the Circassian World website to strengthen the national identity. So it goes on saying, nowadays, both the reality of the harem white slavery and the figure of the adolescent have largely disappeared, gone the way of that slavery itself, just as Norman conquest of England's small kingdoms, small quote unquote, dampened slavery there. So European and Turkish imperial power closed down long-range slaving out of the Black Sea region. In the West, an abolitionist movement ended the Atlantic slave trade by the mid-19th century. In the East, around the same time, Russia abolished slavery and severely curtailed the Eastern European and Caucasian slave trade. As this slavery faded, so did its iconography, but ideals of white beauty endured. They had become firmly embedded in the science of race. So these ideas of white beauty continues to persist even to this day. It's a quote that I always tell, that I always say, is basically that white women didn't help us with women's rights and that whole movement. They were helping themselves technically, because they've always been treated a little bit less than, and we can see that with the white race, white beauty and women being coined as enslaved people. We didn't hear too much about men, right? And this subject is what woman is more feminine and has the sexual endeavors to please a man mostly. And then if you read chapter 5, that just speaks about the white beauty ideal as a science, but we'll jump into that because, again, it becomes a science. It becomes something where, like Wickelman says on page, on page 59, and I have 10 minutes. Yeah, perfect. It says the hard, pure white aesthetic that Winckelmann popularized rested on the authority of the Renaissance, making the issue of whiteness versus color more than a simple question of taste. So we'll just end there, and that will sum up the history of white people and give us an introduction into chapter 5 for the white beauty ideal as a science, because they broke this down as a science. And the further we get into the chapters, I believe it's this chapter, chapter 5, we'll start to see that they broke it down to the size of your cranium. They broke it down to the size of your lips, your jaws, how strong your bones were. Were you big? Were you small? You see how they even said the Asians were the pure whites because they were the most pure whites, but they had only 3 hairs on the beard. So it started to become a science to the point where they even started literally measuring each other in their skulls. So we'll be able to see that. We'll be able to learn also about Ralph. I won't tell you about him. We'll get to his chapter and we'll actually discuss that there. So anything to add, go ahead. And I'm Naila. I'm your CEO, your founder of R3, Realives, Realives, where we promote knowledge of self through education and activism. What better way to do that than to read, write, and comprehend for your own understanding instead of someone always telling you what you should know. You should know it for yourself. So we are reading the history of white people, and I'm going to pass it over to our hostess with the mostest. She'll let you know a little bit more. And anything to add, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're there.
Oh, okay. It is a very interesting book that, well, you know what I'm glad about? Well, that to know, humanity has always been kind of violent and vile, but I'm glad that it didn't initially start off as a division of races. It was mostly a division of power and money based on proximity.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe there's hope for humanity yet. I don't know. But we are at R3 Realize. If you can get us every Tuesday at 3, we are reading The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. And this book is gets a lot of historical references to the development of race. It gives a lot of development to how people acted and reacted hundreds or 800 years ago regarding race. It also gives you insight into slavery. Like you said earlier, the American slave trade, and I don't mean the United States only, I mean in the Americas, is specifically focused on black slavery, and that's all we hear about. But we also hear that there were slaves across Europe prior to that. And only the race issues developed during that this American slave trade in the last 400, 500 years. Prior to that, it was just based on proximity. But if you want to know more, you want to read more, get the book by Nell Irvin Painter and register at R3 Realize at the website where you can get updates on our activities, the books we're reading, the times we're going to be meeting, and you can join. You can also like, share, follow for free. We are here every Tuesday. So I didn't know didn't have my camera on, but it's done.
There you go.
Every Tuesday. So drop a like, share, and follow. We really appreciate that. And we will also appreciate big dollars because, you know, this is a system that we need to be able to help the people outside of our immediate view. People who are often gone unseen. You walk by on the street, they might need a hand up, and we are here to do that. in any way we can. You give us $1, we'll buy a top ramen and take it to them hot. Whatever you could give us, we'll take at R3 Real Life. Thank you for joining us, and see you next week, Tuesdays at 3. Back to you, kid. 3.
All right, perfect. I don't know how much time we have left, but I got a clap there. Melody, did you want to unmute and say anything? I like to put you out there so that my live knows that you were here too when I post it later.
I found, thank you. Hi, family.
Hello.
I found it was what I was finding in the early chapters is how people, writers and philosophers and stuff, were guessing at what people would look like and what they would act like from certain countries. They didn't even base these things on personal knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
They were writing and philosophizing about things. They must be darker because they live here. They must be hardier because they live there. They were just guessing. And that was crazy to me that people were writing whole books about races and different tribes, and they had never seen these races or tribes at all themselves with their own real eyes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Agreed. Okay. So we are R3. We're eyes, we're lives, we're lives. Where we promote knowledge of self, again, through education and activism. And what better way to do that than to read, write, and understand, overstand for your own information. And I'll leave off with the quote that I think she picked out perfectly. Nell Irvin Painter on page 55, second paragraph. Where culture goes, there goes critical theory. So just keep that in mind and have something to talk about next week. When we see you guys, read chapter 5. Don't forget. And if you're feeling froggy, then leap over to chapter 6. And I'll catch you guys next week. If I'm a little bit late, just stay in the chat room. My computer is a little bit delayed. I need to upgrade. But I'll see you guys next week. Peace.
Peace.